Some guests walked onto that stage to be watched, others walked on to be part of it. That's not a small difference. It's the whole difference. It's the line between the guests this show still talks about and the guests it quietly tries to forget. We already ranked 10 of them once. You told us in the comments we weren't done. So we went back into the archive, and we found 10 more. 5 who understood exactly what this show needed from them, and 5 who never quite figured it out. Some of these names you'll recognize instantly. Some you'll have to Google. All of them answered the same question, whether they knew they were being asked it or not. And stick around for the last name on this list. He's not even from the original show, and he might answer this question better than anyone else here. Let's start with the ones who got it right. Loved, Peter Ustinov. Before this show was a hit, it was a gamble nobody wanted to fund. American networks passed. British broadcasters shrugged. A frog hosting a variety show with monsters in the wings wasn't a pitch, it was a punchline. Then a handful of guests said yes anyway, in the earliest handful of episodes, back when saying yes to this show still looked like a career risk. Peter Ustinov was one of them. By the time he walked through that door, he already had 2 Academy Awards on his shelf and a reputation for something rarer than fame: the ability to become someone else, instantly and convincingly, purely for the pleasure of the transformation. That skill, vanishing into a voice that isn't your own, is, once you strip away the felt and the foam, the entire premise of a Muppet too. And he didn't just talk about it, he did it, sketch after sketch. In Muppet Labs, he lets Dr. Bunsen Honeydew turn him into an actual Muppet, a malfunctioning robot politician who cycles through a British Prime Minister, an American President, and a Russian Premier before he short-circuits. Later, he and Fozzie play 2 straight-faced academics arguing post-Dickensian economics. He turns up in a fake news bulletin as a doctor who's cured the common cold with a paper bag and a jar of honey. He isn't performing at the Muppets from a safe distance. He's performing with them, fully inside the bit, every single time. The show noticed, by the end of the episode, half the cast has quietly fallen for him. Miss Piggy swoons, Fozzie calls the sketch with him the highlight of his career, again. Hilda brags about the compliment he gave her stitching, Scooter asks for his autograph, and announces he wants to grow up to be just like him. Kermit, watching all of this pile up, gets genuinely, comically jealous. So Ustinov ends the episode doing the single most generous thing a guest star can do on this stage. He deflates the whole joke by admitting he's the envious one. He's always wanted to be a frog. He didn't just visit as a distinguished outsider slumming it with puppets. He let the show turn him into one of its own characters, poked fun at himself the whole way through, and handed the episode's last emotional beat back to Kermit instead of keeping it for himself. That's a difficult trick. Most performers who try to elevate a comedy show by staying dignified just end up looking stiff. Ustinov never looked stiff. He looked amused, while doing everyone else's jokes right alongside them. On this stage, that's the harder thing to pull off. Hated Rich Little here is a very different kind of talent walking through the same door. By the mid-1970s, Rich Little was one of the most successful impressionists in America, a career built almost entirely on a handful of dead-on voices: Richard Nixon, Johnny Carson, Jack Benny. Everything else in his repertoire was, by most honest accounts, a rough variation on those same 3. The show built him an episode where he could do exactly what made him famous, and that's where it falls apart. Not just with the Muppets, but across the board. Watching it back decades later, retrospectives don't single out one weak spot. They describe an impressionist who states who he's doing rather than sounding like them. A Gene Kelly that lands closer to Joan Rivers. A Kirk Douglas reduced to shouting the word dimple. A Maurice Chevalier whose accent convinces no one. The show's own Muppeteers have to bail him out with dialogue cues. Kermit has to announce, "Sing it, Bing," because nothing in the performance itself gives it away. And when he turns the impressions on the Muppets themselves, it gets worse. His Kermit is just his own voice with a rasp. His Miss Piggy is a pinched nose and a hand cupped over his mouth. His Fozzie goes on so long that Fozzie himself eventually walks out and puts a stop to it, reeling off a list of actual comedians, Bob Hope, Milton Berle, Jack Benny, as if reminding the room that being compared to him is not a compliment. That's the real failure here. A Muppet Show guest is supposed to be pulled into a world that's already moving. Rich Little brought an act that needed the audience to already know who he was pretending to be, and asked the Muppets to stand around confirming it for him. The episode survives anyway, but almost despite him, not because of him. Backstage, Gonzo has spent the whole episode auditioning chickens for a dancing act that's going nowhere, and after one more failed audition, he ad-libs to no one in particular. Nice legs, though. That's the exact moment his lifelong obsession with chickens was born. By the closing, Rich Little tries one final impression, claiming he's perfected an impersonation of a Muppet star and just makes chicken noises. Gonzo comes running, my kind of performer. It's the biggest laugh in the whole episode, and it has nothing to do with Rich Little's actual talent. 40 years later, fans remember Gonzo and his chickens. Almost nobody remembers the impressions. Loved Lena Horne. Back to the beginning again, because there's a second name from those same fragile early episodes that deserves its own moment. Lena Horne had spent decades fighting for the kind of respect this show didn't need her to fight for. She'd broken barriers as a black performer in Hollywood at a time when the industry actively worked to keep her out of leading roles. By the time she arrived here, she wasn't auditioning for anyone's approval. So when she stepped onto a stage built from felt and foam, she didn't perform above it. She let herself get pulled all the way in. The clearest proof comes backstage, away from her own numbers entirely. Animal wrecks Gonzo's act that week, and afterward Gonzo wanders into Lena's dressing room on his own, banging his head against the door in defeat. Lena notices him and sings "I'm Glad There Is You" to cheer him up. Nobody wrote that scene to showcase her voice. It exists purely to comfort a sad blue weirdo, the kind of gesture few guest stars on this show ever bothered with. Minutes later, she's just as at home in the chaos itself. Animal finds her missing key by whacking her foot with a mallet and diagnosing it as B-flat, and she plays along without missing a beat. She's just as generous with the show's most fragile ego. Kermit quietly cancels Miss Piggy's number that week, so Piggy won't be compared unfavorably. There are singers, and there are singers. And lets Piggy believe he did it to protect her feelings, not her performance. It's a small cruelty dressed up as kindness. Lena is the one who undoes it. At the close of the show, she tells Kermit that Piggy deserves her own spot next time. The guest star ends up being kinder to Piggy than the show's own host. And when Fozzie complains that Kermit always gets to talk to the guest star, Lena doesn't just tolerate him, she plays it completely straight, telling him that when you're a name in show business, of course everyone knows the great Fozzie Bear. A 2-second exchange that treats the show's least respected performer like a peer, without a trace of condescension. That's the pattern with the early guests who helped this show survive its own uncertain beginning. Ustinov and Horne didn't elevate the show by standing above it. They let it pull them all the way in, into its chaos, its insecurities, its saddest blue weirdo having a bad week, and treated all of it as worth taking seriously. If you're new here, this is the kind of guest-by-guest deep dive we run every week. Hit subscribe if you want to see the next 10, because the list only gets stranger from here. Hated, Tony Randall. Now here's the strangest entry on this whole list, because this one isn't a story about what happened on camera at all. Randall's episode is, by any fair account, one of the better produced installments of the whole run. He turns Miss Piggy into a stone statue with a magic spellbook, then spends an extended scene with Scooter trying to reverse it, a sequence spun entirely out of an in-joke, with several of Randall's incantations actually being crew and performer names spelled backward. He commits completely, holding character through what were, for 1980, genuinely ambitious special effects. Retrospectives single him out as one of the rare guest stars who found the exact tone this show needs. Silly enough to belong, controlled enough not to tip into cartoon. If you only watched the broadcast, you'd assume this was one of the easiest weeks the crew ever had. It wasn't. Randall stands out in Henson's own account of the show's run as one of a small handful of guests who made the week genuinely hard. He kept inserting himself into decisions that weren't his to make, pushing harder for control over his scenes the longer filming went on. Henson himself diplomatically told one interviewer around this time that some guests relate to us more easily than others, the kind of understatement that, once you know what's behind it, reads less like a passing comment and more like a scar. This is a different kind of hated than anything else on this list. Every other name here failed in front of the audience. Randall succeeded in front of the audience and made the week harder for everyone behind it. The frog was real to the people watching. Behind the felt curtain, somebody had to manage a guest star who kept trying to direct his own episode from the inside. Which raises an uncomfortable question this format usually avoids. How many loved performances on this show were actually earned by a production team quietly absorbing friction the audience never got to see? Loved, John Denver. This one is not complicated, and it doesn't need to be. By 1979, John Denver wasn't just a guest booking, he was already a genuine friend of Jim Henson's. The kind of friendship that existed outside of contracts, built on a shared, almost naive belief that entertainment could make people gentler instead of louder. Kermit introduces him in the episode itself as one of the good guys of contemporary music. And for once, that's not just show business flattery. The premise is disarmingly small. Kermit wants to take everyone camping at the swamp where he grew up. Nobody actually leaves the theater. The whole episode is just the gang arguing about whether to go, with Miss Piggy flip-flopping between horror at the idea of carrying her own backpack and sudden enthusiasm the second she hears Kermit will be teaching swimming lessons. It shouldn't work as an episode. It works entirely because Denver treats every ridiculous beat of it like it's actually happening to him. The clearest proof is a small, throwaway scene with Gonzo on the stairs. Gonzo casually mentions he's been growing a mold garden. Denver's reaction isn't a punchline delivery, it's stunned, quiet disbelief. Mold garden? Then, after a beat, an equally quiet, far out. It's such a small moment that it would be easy to miss, but it's the whole case for him in miniature. He's not performing surprise for the camera. He's actually listening to what a felt puppet just told him and reacting like it's real, because to him, in that moment, it is. Both of his musical numbers commit just as completely. Garden Song has him sitting cross-legged on the floor, singing gently to a row of plants, and the plants sing back. Grandma's Featherbed is pure goofy chaos, and he ends it dressed as a cranky old grandmother without an ounce of self-consciousness. The songs that came out of that friendship became something bigger almost immediately. Within months, the collaboration expanded into an entire television special built around the same warmth, John Denver and the Muppets, A Christmas Together. 4 years after that, he'd finally get the gang out of the theater and actually camping in the special Rocky Mountain holiday, the trip this episode only ever talked about. There's no twist here, no hidden backstage tension, no critical reappraisal decades later. Just a guest who showed up because he actually liked the frog, and it showed in every frame. Sometimes the simplest answer to, "Did you come to be part of it?" is just, "Yes, obviously. Why would I be anywhere else?" Hated. Twiggy. Contrast. That with a guest who actually gets two very different showcases in the same 40 minutes, and only shows up for one of them. By the 1970s, Twiggy had already redefined an entire decade's idea of beauty. She was, unambiguously, one of the most photographed women alive. And this episode gives her a number built entirely around that fame, In My Life, shot as a tight, static close-up on her face, while a slideshow of her own career highlights plays behind her. No Muppets, no jokes, no interaction with anyone in felt or fur, just Twiggy, singing about her own life, exactly the kind of number any other 1970s variety show would have run. That's the actual problem, and it isn't personality, it's format. The entire appeal of guest starring here was doing something you couldn't do anywhere else. This number could have aired on Donnie and Marie without a single word changed. which makes what happens later in the same episode so strange. Gonzo and Muppy beg Twiggy for a bedtime story, and she delivers one she's clearly prepared in advance, a full, committed reading of A.A. Milne's The King's Breakfast, escalating into an elaborate sketch with a king, a queen, and a talking cow. It's peculiar and a little wonderful, and Twiggy looks like she's genuinely enjoying herself in it. Earlier, Gonzo introduces her on stage as Leafy, Barky, and Branchy, before Fozzie drags him off to correct the record. A dumb little bit that only works because she's willing to stand there and take it. So she can do this. She's shown in the same episode that she's willing to be pulled into the show's nonsense and come out the better for it. She just didn't bring that same willingness to the number that was supposed to be her showcase, and the show makes the contrast embarrassingly literal. This is also the episode that properly introduces Uncle Deadly, a new phantom villain so effective that critics still cite this performance decades later as a highlight. By the closing, Twiggy tells Kermit she had a lovely time and admits she even liked Uncle Deadly. Kermit offers to let her keep him. It's a warm goodbye. It's also a guest star being gracious about the fact that, in her own episode, the most memorable performance belonged to somebody else entirely. Loved Charles Aznavour. If Twiggy's episode proves that presence isn't optional, this next one proves what presence can look like when it's built on something other than comedy. Charles Aznavour arrived from an entirely different tradition, French chanson, decades of songs about heartbreak and longing, performed with theatrical restraint. He wasn't an obvious fit for a show built on chaos, so the writers didn't force chaos onto him. They gave him a dance partner named Mildred, a full-bodied Muppet with her own recurring place backstage, and staged a genuine ballroom number, the old-fashioned way, with pairs of full-bodied Muppet dancers gliding behind them. It should have been a cheap gag. Instead, it played out with real tenderness, a serious performer treating an unlikely partner with the same theatrical seriousness he'd bring to a real one, because that seriousness was the entire point of his artistry in the first place. Later in the same episode, he sings The Inchworm, surrounded by a chorus of Muppet schoolchildren. And somewhere in between, Kermit asks him, half seriously, why Frenchmen are so lucky in love, so Aznavour demonstrates, leaning in and murmuring something to Miss Piggy in his native language, full of warmth and promise. What he actually says, translated, is, your oil filter has a leak and your transmission is sagging. Piggy has no idea. She melts anyway. The joke isn't that French sounds romantic, it's that it sounds romantic to anyone who doesn't understand it, and Aznavour commits to the bit completely straight-faced, never-breaking character to let the audience in on it, until the punchline does the work for him. He extends the same commitment to a running gag nobody could have scripted around a guest star. He spends half the episode debating a talking loaf of French bread over whether it even counts as a real French loaf. By the closing, the two of them have become friends. It's a nothing bit. It's also exactly the kind of nonsense a guest has to take completely seriously for it to land. The same instinct that made the ballroom dance with Mildred work in the first place. Hated. Doug Henning. Not every mismatch on this list is about attitude. Sometimes it's just about walking into the wrong room with the wrong trick. By the late 1970s, Doug Henning was one of the most successful magicians in the world. Bright costumes, a genuine cultural phenomenon who'd already pulled 50 million viewers to a single televised special. The show gives him 4 tricks across the episode: vanishing shells, the classic zigzag illusion, dancing tissues, a swap the lady in the box routine. Every single one crawls. Every single one is stitched together with visible camera cuts, so any illusion the audience might have believed in is quietly undercut by the editing room doing the actual trick. The zigzag routine is the low point. His assistant is one of the ugliest, cheapest-looking Muppets ever built for the show, rearranged into a body with its head swapped for its midsection. Not magical, just unsettling. The irony is that the same episode is packed with real Muppet magic happening right alongside him, and most of it is more impressive than anything he does. Miss Piggy opens the show singing It's Magic while Kermit phases in and out of the background, a trick achieved with nothing more than Jim Henson stepping out of frame at the right moment and Frank Oz reacting as Piggy like it's the most astonishing thing she's ever seen. Later, Robin sings a quiet solo from Henning's own dressing room, sitting on a plain wooden chair, the open kind, with bare legs and nothing to hide behind. There's visibly no room underneath for a performer to be operating him. He sings anyway. Kermit even narrates the show's own trickery out loud at one point, calling it a lot of electronic trickery, and somehow that makes it land harder, not softer, because the show trusts the audience enough to let them in on the secret. Henning needed the audience not to know how his tricks worked. The Muppets built their entire show on convincing you something impossible was happening while quietly showing you exactly how, and it never once stopped feeling like magic. There's a real punchline hiding in the same episode, and it isn't even Henning's. Fozzie tries to be a magician too, pulls a rabbi and then a robot out of his hat instead of a rabbit, and eventually gets buried under dozens of real rabbits that shoot out of the hat like a cannon. Nobody explains how they did it. It's funnier, faster, and more genuinely magical than anything the actual professional magician brought with him that week. Bonus, Prince, one more, and this one doesn't belong on either list, because it isn't from this show at all. Nearly 2 decades after the original series ended, on its 1990s revival, Prince walked into a Muppet studio at the exact moment he'd renamed himself an unpronounceable symbol and gone silent with the press. A guardedness so total that reporters had started calling him, literally, the artist formerly known as Prince. By any reasonable expectation, this was a man too cool, too private, too controlled for a show whose security guard is a bear who can't find your name on the list. That's exactly what happens. Bobo the bear can't locate him on the guest list, so Prince shows him his symbol on an album cover as proof. Bobo squints at it and sees a Rorschach blot of his own mother Mambo dancing with a butterfly on an orange. Prince doesn't correct him. He just heads for the elevator. The whole cast greets him in matching Prince-era leather and lace outfits, breaking into a tribute song. He lets them finish, then deadpans that his leather and lace phase is over, deflating the homage and the moment in one line, without a trace of ego about it. Minutes later, he's getting knocked around in a hee-haw-style hillbilly sketch, swapping corn jokes with a rubber alligator loose on set. Backstage in the commissary, he claims he can turn anything into a song, even the lunch menu, and proves it, performing Starfish and Coffee on the spot. Rizzo the Rat, unimpressed, dares him to do the same with the dessert menu. Prince takes the bet from a rat without blinking, and when a producer-type puppet suggests he might want to work with a dummy for the finale, Prince doesn't flinch. In my business, they're called executives. He's not just tolerating the jokes. He's making them. The one place he draws a line is telling. The Muppets plan his big closing number as a football stadium's worth of purple rats forming his own symbol, a gag, and a slightly hollow one, using his own carefully chosen name as a punchline. Prince quietly says no. He explains, without any of the episode's usual wisecracking, that the symbol means something real and spiritual to him, and performs a different song instead, She Gave Her Angels, played completely straight, surrounded by whatnots dressed as angels. Then, because the room still needs its energy back, he closes with, "Let's go crazy." It's not part of the original show's story. It happened on a different stage, in a different decade, under different rules. But it's the same test one more time, and this notoriously guarded private artist didn't just pass it. He handed the show his silliness for an entire episode and kept exactly one thing back for himself. 20 names now, across 2 of these lists. Ustinov, Horne, Denver, Aznavour, and before them, Moreno, Kelly, Radner, Rich, Kahn. All of them walked into a room built entirely out of felt and wire and somehow made it feel real. And 10 names on the other side who never quite got there, for 10 completely different reasons. Some brought the wrong material, some brought the wrong skill. One brought a genuine cultural phenomenon and simply picked the one room on television where it couldn't compete. Not one of them is a failure as a performer. They're just proof that this specific strange stage asked something very particular of the people who stood on it. Did you come to be watched, or did you come to be part of it? Every name on both of these lists answered that question, whether they meant to or not. You've seen 20 answers now. You'll disagree with some of them. Good. Leave the ones you'd flip in the comments. We're already building the next round from exactly those arguments. The frog is still real. Not everyone who meets him figures that out in time.